So we have a lot of different areas of Central Florida represented, which means a lot of different areas of water and water use. As Julie said, prior to going into private practice, I was the manager for the Orange County Environmental Protection Division, and so I was on the regulating side of things. Now I'm on the regulated side of things, which means for the most part, I represent those entities that have to comply with regulations to ensure that there's good water quality out there for y'all either to drink or to swim, to use for irrigation. Much of the water that is used within our state is used for agricultural reasons as well as industrial reasons. And I think probably the biggest challenge is getting from where your heart tells you you want to be to where technology is going to allow you to go. Because if I said to you, how many of you think that we should have clean water? I can't imagine, my hand's up, okay? Hands up, here it is, okay? But if I said to you, at what cost, it gives you an opportunity to pause. Because it's not just the greedy developer, and it's not just the greedy utility, and it's not just the greedy farmer. It truly has ramifications, kind of like a domino effect, that when you hit on one thing, oftentimes you don't think about the collateral damage or the collateral costs around you. And again, it's not to say that clean water isn't what we all want. It's to say that clean water does come at a price. And so I think, from my perspective, having worked on both sides of the fence, the best thing to do is to figure out where we need the most stringent standards and place them there, and look at where we don't need as stringent a standard and allow for that to be as well. So I'm on the panel for water quality. Mr. Guest couldn't be here today. He's an attorney with Earth Justice. And right now, David Guest and the folks I represent, we're at odds right now. Because there is a move afoot to push for federal regulation of Florida's waters. And the majority of the folks representing industry as well as government, including Florida League of Cities and Florida Chamber of Commerce, the agricultural community, and many others, we're opposed to that. We're not opposed to regulation, and we're not opposed to water quality standards. We're opposed to the federal government placing those standards on Florida's waters. We believe that the folks in Florida should decide what those standards should be. Furthermore, it's our position that one size doesn't fit all. So in other words, and this is my personal opinion, it doesn't make sense to me to set a standard to regulate the ditch along the road to the same degree as it does to regulate the standards for Butler Chain of Lakes, for instance, or the St. Johns River. I want to be able to swim where I want to swim, without the occasional alligator, I may add. But I also want to know that I can afford to allow my kids to go to school. So let me ask you this. How many of you have cars? Okay. How many of you want cars? How many of you want a new car? Me too. I drive a 2006. If one size fit all and money didn't matter, then you should be able to come today and say, hey, Mom, Dad, there's an attorney up there today that said I should get a new car. And you should. Darn right you should. But that's just not how it works. There's a cost for every action. And right now, heads are butting in an attempt to come to a compromise over what that should be. So we do have different needs in the state of Florida. We do have different types of water. There's recreational water, the water that you fish in or swim in. There's drinking water, the type you pull out of the tap. There's irrigation water, and for the most part, we're trying to move, in most cases, if not all, to reuse of water for irrigation purposes and non-recreational purposes that don't require them, so for things like golf course uses and things of that nature. The difficult thing becomes when, again, your heart and your head and technology can't come to terms. So it's really easy to stand out and about and say, hey, I think we should have clean water at all costs, and then not to understand what those costs might be. When the gentleman from the Farm Bureau was up here, he spoke to you about the efforts to date made by the agricultural community to lessen not only the quantity of the water that they use to produce the crops, but then he also spoke briefly to what they're doing to reduce the quantity of nutrient loading, and that is the hot topic. So numeric nutrient loading is what I'm going to talk to you about just briefly, not to bore you. So when I see you all nodding off, I'll just point over here and ask a question, and your friend will bump you, and we'll get your attention that way. I have a daughter who's a sophomore and a son who's a freshman in college, so I know that by now your attention span has really just, you've checked out. And I get that, okay? But if you could just like pay attention with your eyes open and be asleep behind them, that'll work for me, and nod occasionally. And then that way your teachers won't say, why weren't you paying attention? Numeric nutrients are the things, the ones that you would be most familiar with would be something called phosphorus or nitrogen. So how many of you are responsible in part for helping to care for the outside of your home, the lawn? Anybody still help with lawn? Okay. When your folks fertilize their lawns to make it that nice green color, they're using a product that has phosphorus in it, okay? Now, there are different types of fertilizers, and depending on the amount you use and how you use it and when you use it, those types of products can get into the stormwater system and or into the groundwater simply by nature, right? You apply it, the rain comes, it has to go somewhere, it goes down into the root system, it eventually gets below there to the hydrogeology, and it carries away through groundwater. The concern has been in Florida that in particular, certain types of products have not been regulated to the extent they need to be to minimize the type of loading that develops, in some instances, algal blooms. So there is an effort right now to regulate all of the waterways in the state of Florida to make sure that we are doing the best that we can to keep our water clean. I guess I would propose to you that we need to take a good look every time we implement a regulation. It's not just implementing the regulation, whether it's an environmental regulation, a regulation about your right to work, a regulation about the minimum wage, a regulation about how you vote. Everything has a repercussion. And incorporating the federal standards right now that are being proposed, I believe, and many others also believe, that will have a significant ramification on the economy in the state of Florida. It will not be feasible for many companies, many types of businesses, including agriculture, and the Cattlemen's Association has also come out against the numeric nutrient criteria that's being proposed by the EPA, because it's just not doable. It doesn't make sense, common sense, environmental sense, or fiscal sense to regulate every single waterway to the same degree. It makes the most sense to spend the lion's share of our money and effort to regulate those waters that truly are impacted and would serve the best all around, ecologically and environmentally, for your recreation, for the health of the systems, to regulate those to the greatest degree possible and understand that not all water is the same. So, I mean, I guess, you know, when I was your age, I would sit at home and listen to my parents talk politics, and generally what would happen is you imprint those people around you, those people closest to you. So I venture to say I could ask you who your parents voted for, and while some of you may be of an age where you're starting to think a little differently, for many of you, your thoughts will be parroted, or you will mimic those of those you're closest around, and many times that's your parents. In the case of the environment, I would ask you to look at both sides of the story, because there's usually more than two, and understand that with everything that you do and with everything that you don't do, there is a consequence. So how many of you currently have a water bottle with you in a backpack? Keep your hands up. How many of you, if you don't have one with you, how many of you used a water bottle, carried a water bottle, drank out of a water bottle in the last week? Come on, don't be shy. Keep them up, I'm not done. How many of you, when you were done with the water bottle, threw it away? I'll even go there. How many of you recycled it? I don't want to get you all, you know. How many of you refill that water bottle more than once? Okay. Look around the room. Because those of you that use the water bottle and recycle it are part of the problem. Right? You didn't want to be part of the problem when you walked in here today and you heard you were going to hear about water quality. You were all on the side of, I want clean water. I'm guessing very few of you are on the side of what's it going to cost. And what I'm saying to you is, as you get older, it's your responsibility to ask the other question. It's not your responsibility, nor would it be good stewardship to say, well, if it costs too much, we don't want it. No, no, no. But how about, what's the cost? What's the benefit? Is there a way that we can spend the biggest portion of our money to get the biggest benefit and look at where we might be able to compromise elsewhere? So as you think about what you hear today, recognize that there's more than one side to the story. Recognize it's not just as simple as, let's just not do that anymore. You realize if none of you drank the bottled water, there's probably a number of people that would then be out of business, right? All the people that work for the bottled water companies. So it's not one or the other. It's not one size fits all. It's stewardship that makes sense. It's looking for the best solutions that will meet the largest needs for the longest period of time. It's constantly looking at the technology and tweaking it. And to be very honest with you, having worked in both the regulated side of things and the regulator side of things, the majority of the advancements in technology to protect our water, to protect our air, and to protect our land come from the very entities that are regulated by the rules. Because it doesn't make good business sense for companies to operate outside of the parameters of the rules. They get fined. And if there is a way to recycle water and reuse it, they do it because it keeps their costs down. And if there is a way to use less chemicals to fertilize a particular area or parcel of land, they do it because it keeps their costs down. So it's not just the regulated entities that need to be thinking more globally. It's all of us. And if we think smart instead of just with our heart, sometimes we get a better answer. That's not to say you shouldn't keep looking at things with rose-colored glasses, because I think that's how some of the best solutions are developed. But when you do that, keep in mind that there is a price for everything, and that when you pay that price, you have to look long-term. You have to figure out the best technological solution to allow for us to have the cleanest water possible and still allow for our farmers to farm, the cattle to drink, for y'all to swim, for the fishermen to fish. It's not just you. It's not just that one water bottle.
I'm thrilled to be here to talk about my favorite subject, water. Julia said that water quality is biological, physical, chemical. I'll add mechanical and hydraulics to it. As an engineer, there's two other very important things we worry about when we're talking about water quality. My name is Rob Teegarden. I work for OUC. We're a water energy company local in town. If I can figure out how to use the technology. Our water service area is the core of Orlando. It also includes a lot of Orange County. We have 200 square miles of water service area. We've got a lot of pipes. You see there's 1,700 miles of pipes, and we serve about 137,000 accounts. We have about 240,000 accounts in the energy side. You notice us if we're out of service, either energy or water. It's very important, constructed facilities. If you go on the outsides of town, you'll see those parabolic cooling towers as you go down the beeline. We're very proud of the environmental exhibit that is. That's a zero discharge, zero withdrawal energy center. Those cooling towers are cooling towers that treat the makeup water, and we put reclaimed water out there. So that's what allows us to be not using any water whatsoever except reused water. This illustrates the patchwork of utilities. In utility work, something that's very important is service areas and rates. People are very in tune to their water rates or energy rates, what they pay for water. We have carved out service areas that allow us to serve efficiently both water and energy services. This, between Daytona Beach and Tampa, there's about 70 water utilities. It's a patchwork of utilities. That illustrates that. What people realize when they get in this water business, every water solution, or wherever you live, is a local solution, both water, wastewater, and what you do with the reclaimed water after you've treated it. Here in Orlando, we used to be drinking lake water. It was a big deal to switch from surface water to groundwater. People didn't like it. They were afraid of it. In the 50s, and it was a big turn for Orlando to think they're going to drink that nasty groundwater because they like their pristine lake water. At the exact same time, Tampa was converting from groundwater to surface water because they were having different issues. The wastewater plants evolved and how we treat water. We weren't poisoning or littering ourselves. So every water solution is where you live. And in the state, we're trying to deal with a lot of big priorities. It feels overwhelming, but remember, water solutions are in your hands, and they're local and they're regional. Just some more background on where OUC came from. We've been around since 1923. A lot of people don't realize in the water business how much is buried away and how costly and expensive that infrastructure is. One valve that's at the top of that pipe is $50,000. A lot of times we will have several hundred of those size valves out on big pipelines, and it's buried away where no one can see it. It's expensive infrastructure in this country. You pay your rates to keep it going, and you count on good water quality coming out your tap. And one of the things I always like to talk about is a network system. There's several networks up there that run through your streets: cable TV, telephone, telecommunications, reclaimed water, wastewater, water, and then that's not to mention the other networks that we have: gas, communications, fuel, jet lines. We have a jet line fuel coming from Tampa, the port of Tampa, to get to the airport. So there's a lot of networks out there that we're constantly coordinating with, and it's very expensive infrastructure. And everybody, we think we're all working together, but we're typically not. And when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in projects, we're trying to coordinate it, but our needs are often 5 or 10 years apart. We've heard about minimum flows and levels. It's an important regulatory term. It's an important compliance term near and dear to water and agriculture. I'm here to also increase the wow factor. When you turn on your tap, I want you to say, wow, that's good water quality. When you flush the toilet, I want you to say, wow, where's it go? It's very, very important. People don't realize you're bringing the equivalent of if you use 10,000 gallons a month, you're bringing the equivalent of weight of a car in and out of your house every day. That's pretty significant when you think about the technology of good water quality and then safe environmental disposal and then reuse of that water. We have a lot of people that wonder, again, what is going on with water. And customers want good rates, they want it to be good quality, and they want good bills. It's simple and accurate. Local government managers typically do not want to raise the rates. Utility leaders are trying to explain what we do in a complex world, and elected officials are mostly trying to get reelected, but they're also trying to deal with the priority of the moment in front of them. And sometimes water isn't that priority of the moment, and it's not important to them. And just like you guys waiting for lunch, you glaze over because it gets really, really complex very quickly. We have a very, very important water environment in Florida. We're very lucky. The thing that I would encourage you to do is be very optimistic. Because I work for an energy company, the energy-water nexus is a very exciting field that's going to be some technological leaps. They'll be using more of the digital world. We'll be using algae to do other things with, to clean up the water. We'll be grabbing multidisciplinary solutions for both energy and water. Instead of wastewater plants, we should start calling them recycling centers, using that to generate energy, fertilizers, and work on solutions. And there are those things going on out there, and it's your future, and I would encourage you to stay with it. And you need to study math and science, and I can tell from the audience most of you are motivated to stay with it. Thank you.
You talked about the EPA being involved in regulating Florida's water quality. Can you tell me what the status is of that at this point?
Yes. Right now, the DEP has implemented or proposed and passed statewide numeric nutrient criteria that is still being challenged by a couple of the environmental groups. So it's kind of in a state of limbo. Depending on the outcome of those efforts, then we should know fairly shortly whether or not the DEP's quality criteria will be implemented or whether we'll be forced to use those from the EPA or a combination of both. So still waiting.
What can each of us do to make sure that we make water quality better?
Well, I mean, nobody likes to hear that it starts with you, but it truly does. If we as individuals, when we're fertilizing our own lawns, would look for those low phosphorus type products and use those, and then you would set the example for the next and the next, then it would be easier to motivate others. Unfortunately, again, when it comes down to cost, the lower phosphorus loading types of products, they aren't maybe as available, maybe people don't know about them, maybe they just don't look for them. But certainly from a personal perspective, when you're out and about, you saw the film, the little clip from Mad Men that Ms. Bardette had, and that's true even today. Probably not to that extent, but when you're out on a boat, don't pitch it overboard. When you're going down the street, don't throw it into the storm drain. I think that a conscious effort every day and all day allows for a better way for you to contribute positively.
To value water in your heart and its value in the ecosystem and the water quality, I think everybody grows up with water differently. I grew up in the West. It's a different ecosystem, ecology. I went to the University of Florida. I'm a Gator. He said UCF earlier, and I jumped in some of those springs, and it was the late 70s. I value those springs highly, and again, everybody feels it in their heart, but the optimism that I have is for rainwater harvesting, stormwater reuse, aware of regulations, using less water. That is a trend going on all over the world, but we can do even better at it. The ironic thing is, as we use less water, we're making less reuse water, and some of the pipes and systems we put out there to now reuse the water, again, we don't have enough water to put in it, so we're supplementing that with groundwater. So again, the unintended consequences, you push one side out here, it goes out the other end. So I'm more optimistic, and stormwater reuse, rainwater harvesting, valuing your ecosystem is what you feel in your heart.
Mr. Teegarden, I understand that the Stanton Energy Center is a coal-fired facility. Is that correct?
It's actually a combination coal and combined cycle gas.
Okay. Well, I congratulate you on your air quality control measures. I am concerned with, and maybe you can explain to me so I have a better understanding of what you do with your coal ash. I understand that Florida has very low regulations for the storage of coal ash, one of the worst in the nation, actually. And we've seen some tremendous tragedies in Alabama, Tennessee, and I'm curious what your response on your storage facilities. I understand that we have in your facility a large amount of lead, nickel, and cadmium, and which would directly leak into our groundwater supply. So, thank you.
You're right, there are heavy metals in coal and the residuals from burning. We care about that deeply. We have lined landfills. We have 5 different stormwater systems that it's highly managed, and it stays on site in lined landfills for the coal ash. We recycle all the lime slurry to go do water softening at the water plant. So the air treatment residuals are reused, and the coal fly ash is landfilled on site in a landfill.
I have a question about what's being done about the heavy metals we find in landfills and what's being done to stop them from seeping into our groundwater. Because I'm sorry. That's my question. Sorry.
Landfills, there's several different types, and so I'm going to, the type you're speaking about, I assume, is either a Class 1 or a Class 3 landfill. A Class 1 landfill is municipal waste landfill. It's where your garbage would go. A Class 3 landfill is where construction and demolition debris would go. That's stuff like if I took down a building, the concrete, the wood, those types of things, those would go there. In the state of Florida, Class 1 landfills, where you would most likely attribute heavy metal infiltration, are required to be triple lined. So there are significant criteria prior to developing a landfill that need to be addressed through the permitting process, and that includes how they're engineered, not only during the operational phase, but for a 30-year thereafter closure phase. The young lady said we referred to a landfill as being lined, and maybe some of you don't know what that means. It has to be lined, and I'm not sure, do you know what the millage is on the clay liner? No. There's almost, it has to be an impervious, the best way I could describe it is like a visqueen, a thick plastic, but it's extremely dense. It's not like a plastic bag or anything like that. It has to be able to withstand particular engineering criteria. So it's a liner that goes before any of the cells, and the cells are the areas in a landfill that are worked. It's where the actual deposits go. So all of that has to be pre-lined before anything can be deposited. And in addition, all Class 1 landfills have to have a groundwater monitoring system around the entire perimeter of any of the active wells to make sure if there was a puncture in the cell or in the lining of the wall between the deposit and the surface, that it could be caught and taken care of.
I was wondering, what's the difference within regulation and quality for bottled water and tap water?
Bottled water industry is regulated by FDA, so it's actually lower water quality standards than the drinking water standards. Those of you that may have read the paper on Sunday, there's a UCF professor that was on the cover of the Local and State. It was a drinking water taste test. I encourage you to look at that. The article goes on to say how the environmental problem of bottled water. We in the water industry know that most of the use of bottled water is for convenience. I don't think anybody's afraid to go fill up from a bubbler somewhere and the water quality. They're not afraid of the water quality. Other places in the world, that isn't the case. So we need to not use the plastic bottles, and then you can begin be valuing the water highly in your heart and use your own container from home. The drinking water standards are very are very strict.
Rob, I had heard, I don't know how true this is. At one point in time, I do know that this was the case, and I'm just going to ask Rob to confirm if he does know, that total suspended solids, which is not something that you could see necessarily with the naked eye, but can be seen under a microscope. So it's the amount of solids that can be suspended in a liquid in a homogeneous state. In bottled water, that is not regulated. Is that still true?
That's true, but if it's sitting on the shelf and looks murky or has moss in it, it's not very appealing to be sold.
No. But if you look at, has anybody ever heard of the brand called Pellegrino?
Yes.
You pay like $4 or $5 in those fancy restaurants when you want to impress the girl. Take a look at what the TSS is on that.
Well, the local reporters that reported the story also did their own taste test of bottled water and ROUC water, and they couldn't tell the difference. So I'm told that's on the video. You have to go to the site to see it, but I am going to check it out, and it was a humorous exchange, I'm told.
I know you talked about regulation of criteria pollutants, nitrogen and phosphorus in different waters, and I attended the water forum back in the fall, and they had talked about using macroinvertebrates as a biological indicator of water quality, because as you said, some bodies of water can withstand higher levels of nitrogen and phosphorus and still be okay, whereas others cannot. Was there any more talk about using those as a biological indicator rather than just relying on the nitrogen and phosphorus levels?
I've not followed that to that extent, so I would not be one to answer that for you. I do know that there's 3 websites that I would suggest that you go to find the most current data. Under myflorida.com, under the DEP website, there's actually an entire tab on just numeric nutrient criteria. There's also another one, obviously, on the EPA's website as well, epa.gov. And then there's a third that I think is is under the Florida Chamber of Commerce. So those 3 websites have probably the most update and probably can give you the widest range of information that's out there. UF Trio also has a website.
I just wanted to ask Mrs. Long, if our Florida water quality standards are so good, why are there 147 dead manatees in southwest Florida right now due to red tide, which is the highest death rate of manatees because of red tide in our history?
Well, I don't believe that I said that the Florida water qualities are outstanding. What I said was that I and many others support the state's implementation of water quality standards over the federal water quality standards because the state's water quality standards are looking at varying the standard based on the type of water body that they're regulating. And I would still concur to that.
What is red tide?
Red tides occur naturally. They've been occurring for a long time, but the toxins from the algae cause problems, and it's like a neurotoxin. It poisons some of the macroinvertebrates or the small multicellular organisms, or if it gets enough, it'll actually paralyze or poison a big animal like manatees. I'm very sad about the manatees too. It is a natural occurrence, but we've been accelerating some of these events because of man's activities. That is occurring in different estuaries, and we're needing more solutions. But it is a sad indicator of some of our water quality.
Mr. Teegarden, you touched on it earlier about the cost, infrastructure, things like that, because a lot of students in here, they hear about the cost and it doesn't really hit home to them, I think, until actually you get your first water bill. The first time you own a home and you water your yard for that first summer and you're like, oh, now I have to reduce. So until then, it just seems like the water just keeps coming. So when we talk about water quality, water treatment, consumption, what kind of costs have we seen in the past? How are those costs increasing? What kind of bills can these kids expect when they actually get out and have to start paying their own water bills if we don't start to treat this water quality, don't start reducing, things like that?
I'll explain a range of costs for different water qualities, but Anna and I both used to work for Orange County. I happen to know some capital costs of the landfill out there. We paid roughly at that time, and it'd be more expensive today, $300,000 an acre to develop it as a landfill to pile garbage on. It is an engineered structure. It's like a birthday cake. You have landfill gas collection, and we in turn collect that from the decaying garbage. So it's a very expensive proposition. It's a very important piece of infrastructure for this community. To treat groundwater, it costs us all in about just under $2 per gallon capital cost to deliver. If we're going to go do seawater desalination, it's going to be $10, so it's 5 times more. And you have other environmental treatment of the concentrate and the energy costs. So we're very much into doing the highest quality water source and getting ready for 30 to 50 million people that are going to be here in 50 to 100 years. We aren't thinking in 10 or 15 years, we're thinking in 50 to 100 years, and the infrastructure we build today, we're going to invest in that because it is so expensive, it's going to be around for a long time.
I keep hearing about all this advancement in technology and how we can further everything, but who's going to pay for that? Is it going to be all of our taxes that pay for everything?
The revenue comes from rates or taxes, and people need to support either one, and that's always a hard sell when we all feel it in our wallet.
But also a lot of the advancements in technology come from students that move on to universities with broad-based research programs. So UCF is one of those institutions, as is UF. And when they're faced with a problem such as water quality, many of the governing entities within the state, that's where they turn. So they are looking at things like red tide and the algal bloom, and looking at where best to spend the money for water quality research as well as water quality solutions. With respect to implementation, then depending on what business entity or what land use or which water use is impacting the water body the most, then those costs will get passed on to that entity and eventually the end user.
Is water also polluted because we use it as our toilet?
I'm not quite sure what you meant by that question.
I mean, to be blunt, do you mean when you're out in nature and you take a whiz in it, or do you mean when you flush it? I did tell you I had the teenagers at home, so if it's the former, okay, I guess if we all day, every day practiced that, then there'd be issues. But if you're talking simply about using the toilet in a manner in which it is meant to be used, then, that's treated. That's part of the wastewater system that Rob was talking about.
So one of the truisms you guys need to again get in your water ethic is the right water for the right use. Some water shouldn't, if it's available, shouldn't be used. It's poisonous. But if you're aware of the water quality and use it for the correct use, it's perfectly good. Out in the West, water of any volume is very valuable for irrigation or other purposes. So we have seemingly abundant supplies of water. Part of that ethic is thinking the right water for the right use, and whether you're ag, industry, or others, you might not need the good stuff.
If harsh regulations are become necessary for the upkeep of Florida's aquifer, would you be willing and able to let those businesses who cannot keep up with them die out?
Would I? No, not the way your question was asked, absolutely not. Because I like to turn on the lights and have lights, and I like to turn on the tap and get water. And I like to go to the grocery store and buy my strawberries and my corn, etc. So the way you framed your question was an all or none. And what I'm saying is, all or none is never the solution, in particular with environmental issues. It just isn't. Now, do I think that there will be a cooperative effort in which some businesses will ultimately pay more because they cause more pollution? Absolutely, and that's how it should be.
Thank you.